Welcome to another episode of Best Practices. My name is Steve Alexander. I'm head of growth at Anagram. I'm here with Colton Calendrella, the co-founder and CEO of Barti. Welcome back, Colton.
Hey, thanks a lot, Steve. Excited to be here.
It's my pleasure. So last time you were here, we discussed best practices for selecting an EHR. If you haven't heard that episode, go back in the catalog and give it a listen. It was a great conversation, really insightful. It touched on a lot of operational things, a lot of practice things, a lot of staff things. So for this episode, we want to discuss best practices for maximizing your EHR. And that can mean a lot of things, but when you hear best practices for maximizing your EHR, where does your mind immediately go?
Yeah, it's a great question. And where my mind immediately goes is most people are using 10% of their EHR's capabilities. Like that old statistic about your brain, we only use 10% of our brain or whatever. Same thing with EHRs, most people just get up to frankly, the bare minimum they need to do what they're used to doing, and they never learn anything new. And there's a few ways I think that some low hanging fruit ways for people to level up. The analogy that I always use is for your EHR, your PM system, it is a core part of your process of your business. You almost need to treat it like any other continuing education piece, right? And so doctors, obviously, there's a certain amount of hours of education you're expected to do every year, and that helps you keep on top of your clinical game. For your operational game, you need to be devoting some amount of consistent time to up leveling yourself and the staff. And so that's probably the first biggest headline is it is going to take a little bit of time, but the time is very well spent learning a lot of more capabilities, a lot more functionality. Um, every day we're talking to people who didn't know what they could do in their current system, right? And we always try to be transparent about that. Where if it's something's like, hey, I'm looking at Barti because my system, I want this. It's like, well, why aren't you using that functionality that's available in your current system? And sometimes they know, and sometimes a lot of times they don't know, right? And it's like, okay, well, have you considered just activating that feature that you already have or going to learn it? And to be honest, now that Barti, our platform has so many pieces of functionality, we're at that same point where people go, oh, I didn't know that we could send mass email marketing campaigns. Like, I didn't know that we could send a link for the patient to pay their invoice on their phone. And um, so there's a lot of benefits to staying up to date with the capabilities of software. But I think the first headline is you do need to invest time, you and the staff, even if it's 1 or 2 hours a month. It's good to carve that out, put it on the calendar, put it as part of staff training. Um, some other practical tips we say: have a champion in the office for everything. We always like to have like one point person for maybe it's contact lens sales, one person for your insurance testing, one person for your EHR, and that person should be the rallying the troops. That person should be an expert in that software. Maybe even thinking about paying them a really small stipend, extra couple $100 a month or something, to stay on top of the updates, to stay on top of things that you hadn't used before. But as your practice grows, maybe you need better billing capabilities. Maybe you're adding an insurance that you didn't take before. Maybe you're doing procedures that you weren't doing before, so you need new templates in the exam. Maybe you're stocking a new piece of inventory. You need to make sure that's reflected in your optical software. So have a point person. I think even if you have a point person, though, the other sort of uncomfortable truth of the matter is that the owner needs to know the software better than anyone. And so we often find that the owner, who's the doctor, maybe just knows the EHR part really well. You need to know the ins and outs of a lot of the software. Maybe you don't need to know the billing module to the same degree as your biller, but you need to know enough to be dangerous. And people are going to follow your lead. Where if you as a leader are investing that time to learn and become an expert, your staff is going to follow along. But if they know that you don't know anything about it, they're going to be able to get away with also not knowing anything about it. Um, so I think that's an important piece. Even if you decide to do that, okay, like how do you do that? How are you spending the time to level up, and like what specific actions can someone take? Um, the first one is like so obvious, it's almost painful, but like, are you getting the update notifications from a software company? Meaning, like, are you on the email update? Like Barty, for example, we send out every month, here's all the new features we want. Are you getting that as owner? Are all of your team members on that email just to get the information? is if there's a web page, a lot of software companies also basically have a page where they post all their updates. Bookmark that page. Carve out 30 minutes once a month to go visit that page and read through the updates. And you're like, wow, they fixed that issue or they've added this capability we didn't know about. So make sure that you at least know where that information is, you're subscribed to it, and you're able to access it.
I think a lot of
The other really low hanging fruit.
Oh, sorry. A
Yeah,
lot of what you
go ahead.
touched on there, again, are like really, really important. And so something that I've sort of wrestled with is when I'm introduced to a new piece of anything, basically, if somebody says, "Hey, Steve, you've got to deal with this now," the type of person that will figure out the best way to do everything that I can in that software. Like the example in my head is Excel, right? Or any spreadsheet tool if you're using Google Sheets or whatever. The obvious difference between somebody who knows what they're doing in Excel and somebody who doesn't uh, measurably changes how much time it takes me to get it from where it was to where it needs to be, right? And Excel is a massive piece of software, but it's kind of a blank space unless you know what you're doing. And many PM systems, many EHRs are that way too, right? They're
Yeah.
customizable to large degrees, but if you customize them in a particular way that only works for you, the rest of your team might struggle to get that customization internalized and figure out what to do with it. Um, what I wanted to ask you about here is how does hiring come into play in this? And the reason I ask, there are people who are tech savvy and people who aren't. And it's not really an age thing. Once upon a time, I thought it was kind of an age thing where like, oh, as we get into the newer generation, like everyone's going to be tech savvy. That is absolutely not true. If you're listening to thinking like, oh, young people are better at tech, like maybe on the margins, but in practice, there are people who are way younger than I am that are terrible with technology. And there are people way older than I am who are way better with technology than I am. Like it is not an age thing. There is a comfort. There is an ease of extending your knowledge to software. So does that come into play in hiring, and is that an element of maximizing, EHR efficacy?
It should be. I don't think a lot of times that's on the radar for people hiring, but it should be. I actually was just reading this study about the different ways to evaluate a candidate and what's most effective. And like the most effective one, there are two most effective ones is like a structured interview with like consistent questions and consistent criteria. The other one is like a work sample, meaning like give them a small sample of something that you would expect them to do in their day to day. So if I'm hiring an office manager, two quick things that come to mind is, hey, let's have a difficult conversation with the patient and see how you handle that, how you de-escalate it. But like literally, here's our EHR, here's the software. Like, how would you schedule this appointment, or how would you learn how to navigate this? Even at Barti right now, we're hiring for a product manager, and like we'll literally on the call pull up, ChatGPT or Gemini and be like, how show us how you use Gemini to create a PRD, a product requirement stock, or to create a mock-up. And like that should be part of how you're evaluating people. And if they really are uncomfortable with that, that's going to slow you down, and they're going to basically prevent you from maximizing your software. So
The point that you
I
also
think,
made that the practice owner and management should be experts in the software, obviously because they've got to use it and they should be able to coach people up in there. But I think there's another sort of hidden component there. I don't know if you know this. I went to culinary school. I'm a French trained chef. And something that came with it that I never expected is when I see somebody pick up a knife in a kitchen, I can tell whether they can cook or not just in
yeah,
how they
totally.
hold a knife. And not like the where they
Yep.
place their fingers, just their comfort with having a knife in their hands. You can see that in
Yep.
software. You can see when you sit
Yep.
somebody down, say, "Hey, this is an unfamiliar software. Book an appointment." You can see if somebody will be able to figure it out, or if they're spinning their wheels. And I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think what I would be looking for is their curiosity and ability to learn something new, which again, going, on our previously we've talked about change management, how everyone has to get comfortable learning new things and changing. I don't actually really care if they know how to use Excel or the PM system right away, but like how do they troubleshoot? Do they get frustrated really quickly? Do they give up quickly? those are going to be signals of other behaviors that are going to be challenging. And, if I'm a practice owner and I'm like, I have a great optician candidate, but like they literally don't know how to use any software, it can be tempting to say, we can get around that. But the reality is like you're going to be fighting an uphill battle there then. So I do think that should have pretty significant weight, um, in a hiring process. So yeah, I totally agree. And, luckily I think it's becoming more table stakes for most jobs. And so if they have experience in other places, like probably they're going to come with some element of that. But if you do find someone who's totally unwilling to learn, it probably doesn't just apply to software. It'll probably apply to any time you want them to change anything. And so it's also a signal for sort of a um, broader attribute, you
Yeah,
know.
that kind of agility is invaluable in every staff member and in your process. I think the point that you made about looking at your EHR, especially as like, I don't know if there is a more foundational piece of equipment to your business than your software, than your EHR software. Like as an optometrist, you're Phoropter, right? Probably. But
Yep.
after the actual diagnostic equipment in a standard exam lane, there's nothing more important to making sure your business is successful than good execution of the place where you hold your patient records.
Yeah, yeah. We need to start. I didn't even bribe you to say that, but I totally agree. Let's clip that and put that all over social media. No, I'm kidding, but no, I agree. And if I was an owner here, I might be sitting and thinking, all right, like that sounds great, but like, am I really going to learn every nook and cranny of this EHR? There's like a million screens. Where do I start, or like where do I actually focus if I only have 30 minutes or an hour a month? I'm not really going to become an expert on anything. So we always talk about the toothbrush test. And again, we try to be data driven. So look at where are you going to get the highest return for your learning? Where is the expertise going to give the biggest bang for your buck, for your time? And so the toothbrush test is, how often am I doing this task in the software? Is it twice a day? Like I'm brushing my teeth every day, twice a day? Or is it like something you're pulling once a month? Is it a kind of a random report? Is it a um, you know, template that I'm going to edit every other month when I add a new appointment type? To be honest, those pieces a little bit less important that you're an expert. You can kind of fumble around and figure it out when you do it. It might add another 20 or 30 minutes, but you kind of need to do the math, frankly, right? Versus if it's like every time you book an appointment, you're doing it in the least effective way, that adds up. You're doing it 10, 15 times a day. Again, you run the math. I don't know if you know this about me. I used to be a teacher. And in my one of my training programs, something that blew my mind is we had this whole session on how to have students hand in papers. So if everyone does a pop quiz, and what is the right method for handing in the paper? Because if you actually do the math, you realize, okay, well, if the teacher basically walks and grabs them all one at a time, that takes 3 minutes. Versus if you have a system, you train the kids once, it says, hey, you hand it to the person in front of you, they all hand it to the person in front of them, and then it's all everyone in the front row. That takes 1 minute instead of 3 minutes. And you're like, okay, like, but do I really care? 2 minutes saved. But if you do that 10 times a day, suddenly that's 20 minutes in a day. In a school year, it ends up being like 2 full instructional days that you get, which, that makes a difference. As a teacher, you're always like, I never have enough time. I never have enough time. 2 more full days from making one small change, but because it's something that's so frequent, it can have a huge impact. So again, like, even within Barti, like we added a new shortcut for how to create a new appointment or a new optical order from the homepage rather than clicking to this tab and then clicking. Hey, that saves you one click, but 20, 30 times a day, it makes a big difference. And so I would always say, focus your efforts on sort of the toothbrush test. How frequently are you going to be doing that? If it is something you're doing all the time, that's where you want to learn the shortcuts. That's where you want to make sure you're doing it optimally. And if you're not sure how, maybe I can also talk practically. Besides, I mentioned earlier, making sure you're on the email updates or you're looking at the right website for updates. This again sounds really obvious, but we see it doesn't happen all the time. Ask your EHR company for extra training. A lot of them will do it for free, even after you've already been live, and say, hey, can we do a quick refresher on this? That's really important. A lot of software companies have forums and community groups of other users, where they have like a Facebook group, or they have some kind of group for users to share best practices, um, uh, peer to peer. And so we always encourage people to seek those out. And again, that way, if you're like, hey, I feel like I'm not doing this as fast as I could, or how do you handle this? That can be really helpful as well, because sometimes other peers can have some really creative solutions there as well.
We're lucky enough to be in an industry where there are a lot of different people with a lot of different sets of skills, things that they're experts in that I'm not, or that you might not be, and you can leverage them because most everybody in the industry also wants to help. There's a genuine like community available. You just have to take advantage of it, and you have to ask the right questions. I think the notion of continued investment in your EHR is something that needs to be discussed more. Like I keep thinking back to like as we're talking about this, why is the EHR so difficult to get right? Why is it so challenging to get all of the available features to be implemented thoroughly? And a couple of things came to mind. I asked earlier about the hiring process and certainly the staff development as in an ongoing way. Um, how much of this is that, and I'm going to phrase this hopefully in a simple to answer way. There is a quote that I like that says, like, you can't really save time. You build the life you want, and time saves itself. Right.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things where people will say, like, well, I don't have time to figure this out. So I'm just going to do this band aid method. And then this band aid method just becomes the method. And then the idea of unstacking all the band aids becomes more daunting than learning it the right way the first time. Is it that people really don't have time to make their EHR work for them, or is it that it's not a priority?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think everyone is busy, right? I mean, I joke whenever I'm on a call with someone. No one ever, whether it's doctor, another vendor, another partner. I've never heard someone get on a call and be like, "Yeah, I don't really know how to fill my time. I'm just sitting around eating bonbons, like
Right.
chilling on the couch." Never
Yeah.
once, right? It's always like, "I'm really busy," because we love to fill our schedules. And I think you hit the nail on the head, but I think it's really because it's not a priority. And frankly, it's again going back to that fear of change and fear of learning something new. There's unfortunately just not a lot of people who relish the feeling of not being good at something and learning something new for the first time. So once you learn that band-aid, at least you know it. It's like the devil you know versus the devil you don't. You're like, well, at least I like know how to do it. I probably isn't the most efficient or the best way, but I don't really want to feel like a student again. Frankly, I don't really want to go back to square one and feel like I have to relearn or learn something new. Again, I'm beating a dead horse here, but I actually think that's one of the most important muscles we all need to get better at. Um, Not just like doctors or staff, but everyone, because again, technology is not standing still. Again, going back to my time as a teacher, that's something we talked a lot about is instilling a love of learning, because the reality is a lot of the content or even the way that we're teaching is 100% going to be different in 5, 10, 20 years. A lot of the content, especially if you're talking about technical content, if you're an engineering student, half of that's going to be outdated 3 or 5 years later. So it's more about learning how to learn, learning to love learning. I think that goes even to this when you're talking about learning new software tools and carving out that time. I also think uh, my biggest advice is start somewhere. So you don't need to devote 5 hours a week, but again, even if it's literally once a month, put an hour hold on your calendar and uh, do a little bit of training or do a little bit of research on new features or look at what else is out there. If you've done that and you're like, hey, actually, I might, we don't have that module and I need it, like go spend that time. Um, Again, this is like probably very obvious low hanging fruit, but like put it on the calendar too. I mean, maybe this is just me now. I mean, I live by my calendar, but if you don't schedule it, and to your point, if you don't create the time will not magically appear. Again, there's almost never going to be a Thursday afternoon where you go, oh, I just like magically have nothing going on, and I remember to do this thing that I thought about doing 3 months ago and 6 months before that, but I never did. It's like you need to proactively schedule it, and if not, your odds of it happening plummet.
Absolutely. If it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist. It may as well have never existed because I
Yeah,
will never think about it again. So,
yeah.
playing devil's advocate for a second, if I'm a practice owner and I'm listening to this podcast and I hear I've got to devote an hour of time every month to learning software I already also pay for, how do I justify that time?
Yep. Well, the reality is you need to think about uh, again. So try to remind yourself of how big a small impact can be in the long run. So the software isn't just affecting you in the exam room as a doctor, it's affecting your front office staff, it's affecting your biller, it's affecting your optician. And I would argue that it's one of the best uses of your time because it has such a monumental widespread effect on so many different parts of the process. And so that's what I would encourage people to consider. And it'll make your life easier. So again, forget kind of the cost savings or time savings, but like if you're in this software 5, 6 hours a day, which a lot of people are, um, you know, your day to day will be better if you actually just make that upfront investment. And again, it's similar to like you're already investing that time in other learnings for clinical education, and um, uh, these things are just as worthy of that time.
It was a good answer. I thought it'd be something along those lines, but I wanted to at least open the floor because I imagine that's how a lot of folks hearing this are going to react is I don't want to spend an hour of my time every whatever to learn a piece of software that should be easier to use. And I, on one hand, I understand the sentiment, but should be easier is a relative thing also. To that point, though, the things that you spend your time doing should have an impact on the way you spend the rest of your time. So if you spend an hour getting really familiar with your EHR, that means that whatever time you spend with your staff, helping them get more familiar with it, will be better, will be more effective, will take less time, will get them to be better at doing whatever particular thing you're talking about. I think another component that is missed, and I'm glad you brought this up, is that your EHR partners, they will train you. One of the things that they are most afraid of is churn. And churn is when you leave, right? And they want to prevent that at all costs. And if that means providing training for your team, they're going to provide training for your team. And they're not going to do it in like a general sense. They will train you on the things you ask of them. Leverage that. They are a partner of yours. You have an ongoing subscription, use it. Learn, get better. Every bit of software you're not using is wasted resources. Every mistake made because your process is broken, wasted resources. And all of these things that we're describing, like it's easy to talk about software in a vacuum, but you've drawn it back to the patient experience over and over again. But it's so important and so true that the better you are at your foundational piece of software, the better time your patients are going to have, your staff is going to have, and you as the business owner are going to have as a direct result of those things. We're not even talking about changing your
Yeah.
software. We're just talking about getting better at what you already have.
Yeah, yeah. I'm always to your point. I always try to tie it back to the direct benefits they'll get. So if you have a lot of pajama time, which is you go home, you still have 2 hours of charts to finish as the doctor, you shouldn't be experimenting with Barty's AI Scribe or other scribe tools where that will, if it gives you 30 or an hour back a day, that ends up being a monumental difference in your work experience. And so it's well worth that small investment. Again, it's actually like one of the best ROIs possible. Where if spending 1 hour a month gives you 5, 10, 20 hours extra a month, I'll do that deal all day, every day, right? And same thing for your staff, where hey, like when you unfortunately like you have a break in and a bunch of your frames get stolen, if you weren't tracking your frames inventory and you have no idea what to give the police, or that's really painful, right? And in that moment, you're going to be like, man, I wish I had learned about the inventory module, and I wish I had thought about a little bit of a better process. So whether it's like that ongoing friction of documentation time, or you know, preparing for unfortunately some of the bad things that can happen, it's a very high return is always how I try to frame it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important and easy to miss. I can't thank you enough for your time here, Colton. So the recap that I have, it's a little shorter, but I think it feeds into everything that we discussed. Think of it as a continuing education, right? It is a software that is foundational to your business. The better you get with it, the better your business will get. And I really love your notion of do the toothbrush test. We're not here suggesting you've got to learn every nook and cranny, every keyboard shortcut, every possible permutation of your software. But if there's a thing that you're running into every day, twice a day, that causes frustration, that slows you down, that your front desk person has raised the flag about over and over again, it doesn't have to stay that way. Fix it. It is broke.
Yeah. Yeah. In that case, then if it's broke, fix
Yeah.
it. Right. Yeah. Don't keep shoving it under the rug.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's a great summary.
Thank you. Any final thoughts for maximizing your EHR before we wrap up?
No, I think you said it really well recently. Take advantage of what's available already, right? There's training resources. There's your company, the EHR company will give you time. They're already sending you updates. They have training videos. Leverage those, and create a champion as well that you can help rally the troops.
And also, the right, I mean, give them feedback. If you go through their videos and you find they're wanting or they're not good enough or you just don't like them for whatever reason, give them that feedback because they will then improve it. If they don't ever hear about it, if you just stop using it and you don't make it known that you stopped using it because, then why would they
Right.
change it? You know,
Yeah.
give your
Yeah.
feedback.
They don't know what they don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great call out. And then even just in general, right, with software, at Barti, the way we decide our product roadmap is we literally look at what everyone is asking for and how many people are asking for it. So maybe if you're truly the only person in the universe that wants something, not a great odds that we're going to be able to build it, but that's very rare. Usually there's a bunch of other people. And so if you raise your hand, we're like, hey, actually, there's 10 people who are asking for this. Like, we need to add that or we need to fix that. So yeah, that's selfishly, we would that definitely helps everybody. That ends up helping the end customers as well.
Every feature we've built in Anagram came from a customer of ours saying like, well, why don't you do this? Or what if you did that? And we're like, hey, that's a great idea. We should do that. And then eventually, like now we do.
That's right.
So we're eternally grateful for that kind of feedback. So be that squeaky wheel, right? Make your software better.
Yeah.
That's an easy way forward.
Yeah.
Colton, again, thank you so much
Yeah.
for your time. If the folks listening to this want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, reach out to me. I'm Colton at Barti.com, or feel free to book a demo on Barti.com, our main website. Lots of great resources, pricing, and testimonials there as well.
Thank you again. Thank you so much for listening. I've been Steve Alexander, head of growth at Anagram. Thank you for listening to Best Practices.